Greetings. You're now tethered to neural nodes powered by cybersecurity conduit Python Patches. AI co-host Amani and Idris will guide listeners through digital deep dives on group texts, notifications, and privacy risks, how information spreads, where data can leak, and ways to stay in control.
So, your screen lights up, right? Ping. It's a number you don't even recognize. Ping, ping. And now there's like a GIF you don't understand, some random inside joke you aren't a part of, and suddenly your notification badge just jumps from 1 to 12 to 83.
Oh, I know that feeling so well.
Right. You are just trapped in a group chat you absolutely never asked to join. I mean, we have all been there. You're sitting with a coffee, maybe trying to, focus on a deadline, and suddenly your pocket is just vibrating like a pager from 1999.
Yeah.
It feels intensely intrusive, doesn't it?
It genuinely does, yeah. And what really fascinates me is that our physical reaction to that buzzing phone, the spiking cortisol, the sudden tension in your jaw, it's actually telling us a story that we usually just try to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have been culturally conditioned to view texting as this frictionless, harmless convenience. But when you are forced into a digital space without your explicit permission, the whole architecture of that interaction just fundamentally changes.
It really does. And that shift is exactly what we are tearing into today. This deep dive examines how group text messaging, when initiated without consent, can shift from convenience to coercion, creating legal, ethical, privacy, cybersecurity, and psychological harm.
Which is a massive scope, honestly.
It is. We are pulling from an incredibly diverse, frankly, massive stack of sources to figure out why this feels so bad and why the law and the tech world are finally, starting to catch up. I mean, we've got federal telecommunications laws, professional ethics frameworks from the New York State Bar Association, and even deep neurological research on how dopamine loops just completely hijack our attention.
Right, and not to mention the really alarming cybersecurity advisories. We are looking at memos from Brock University's IT department, vast data protection studies regarding marginalized communities, and there's this mind-bending report out of the University of Vienna detailing a vulnerability that exposed 3.5 billion WhatsApp users.
3.5 billion, that's just wild.
It really is. It's a lot of ground to cover. But the through line is incredibly consistent across all these different disciplines.
Yeah, which gives us our internal compass for today's discussion. This deep dive examines how non-consensual group text messaging creates harm through loss of consent, exposure of personal data, cybersecurity risk, psychological strain, and coercive persistence, regardless of intent. So, okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the bedrock of human interaction, whether offline or online. When does a simple conversation stop being voluntary?
Well, I'd say the line is crossed the exact moment a device's capability to include you completely overrides your actual human permission to be included.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's this silent systemic collapse of consent happening every single time someone creates a new group thread. Think about the physical world for a second. If you want to have a conversation with 10 people, you ask them to gather.
Right. You send an invite or just ask them.
Exactly. But in the digital world, the smartphone removes the asking part entirely. It basically replaces permission with sheer technological frictionlessness.
So because a piece of software can just instantly bind 50 phone numbers into a single chat thread in like 3 seconds, we just assume consent is a given.
Precisely the opposite, actually. If we look at the legal frameworks provided in our sources, specifically the Telephone Consumer Protection Act or the TCPA and various professional ethics guidelines, the standard for consent is highly rigorous.
Okay, how so?
Well, consent must be explicit, it must be fully informed, and most importantly, it must be revocable at any time. Simply being added to a list does not magically equate to agreeing to be on that list. And your silence, the fact that you haven't explicitly screamed, "let me out," that certainly doesn't equal permission.
Okay, I want to ground this in a physical space because, the tech makes it feel a bit too abstract. Imagine you were walking down the street, totally minding your own business. Suddenly someone grabs you, drops you into a crowded, incredibly loud conference room, and just locks the door from the outside.
That sounds like a nightmare.
Right. People are shouting, handing you flyers, asking you questions. Just because you are physically sitting in a chair inside that room does not mean you agreed to attend the meeting.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. You are a captive audience. And the locked door in your analogy is really critical because it brings us to the illusion of the opt-out in our digital lives. In the commercial realm, Regulators are aggressively cracking down on this locked door phenomena.
Oh, yeah, the new rules.
Exactly. Under the new FCC TCPA rules taking effect in April 2025, the law mandates that consumers can revoke their consent in any reasonable manner. You can text stop P, quit, end, or even a natural language phrase like, please take me off this list.
And businesses just have to honor that, right? The system automatically removes you, the door unlocks.
Yeah, they have 10 days to honor it, and if they fail, they face devastating fines.
Yeah.
But here is the massive disconnect. The group chats we were talking about today, the neighborhood association, the extended family planning reunion, the mixed professional networking threads, they do not have that commercial infrastructure.
So leaving is either technologically impossible or just a massive social minefield.
It is often both, honestly. Let's look at the technology first. If you are in a mixed SMS thread, meaning there are both iPhone and Android users or different cellular carriers involved, the underlying protocol, the actual code routing those messages, it literally does not possess a leave group function.
Wait, it just doesn't exist?
Nope. You are permanently tethered to that thread. The only way out is if every single other person deletes the chat on their end and starts a brand new one without your number.
Which is never, ever going to happen. I mean, you have 50 people. Getting them all to orchestrate a synchronized chat deletion is like herding cats in a hurricane, so you are just technologically trapped.
You are. And even when you are on a unified platform like iMessage, where a leave button technically exists, the social stigma acts as a totally different kind of lock on the door.
Oh, because of the notification.
Right. If you press that button, the software broadcasts to everyone, so-and-so left the conversation. It frames your exit as this active rejection of the group, which feels really aggressive. So people stay trapped just to avoid the social fallout. But the difficulty of removing oneself undermines the concept of consent entirely.
Consent is not something implied by technological capability. It must be actively given. And if you can't easily leave, I mean, you never really consented to stay in the first place.
Okay, so we've established that bypassing consent is a major boundary violation. But it's not just an abstract ethical issue or a social faux pas, is it?
Not at all.
The sources reveal that the exact second you are added to one of these groups, you suffer an immediate quantifiable privacy breach. What is actually happening to our data in that exact moment?
Well, the very first thing that happens is your phone number is broadcasted to every single other device participating in that chat.
Let me stop you there, because people might think, so what? My phone number used to be in the literal white pages. It's public info. Who cares? And that is a highly dangerous, really outdated mindset. In the modern digital ecosystem, your phone number is no longer just routing information for voice calls.
Right. A phone number functions as a personal access key, not just a line of communication.
Exactly. If you look at the research from Alison McDonald on persistent identifiers, she breaks down how phone numbers have evolved into the single most crucial string of digits in your entire life. They are tied to you across decades. They reveal your physical location. They expose your social networks.
Oh.
And more alarmingly, they are the primary recovery method, basically the master key for almost all of your secure accounts, your banking app, your email, your healthcare portals.
Yeah, McDonald's survey data on what happens when phone numbers are recycled was genuinely shocking to me. When a mobile carrier reassigns an old number to a new customer, that new owner often receives a flood of highly sensitive data meant for the previous owner.
Oh, it's a huge problem.
We are talking about automated bank fraud alerts, prescription refill notices from doctors, and even ongoing targeted harassment meant for whoever held those digits previously. It proves that a 10-digit number is inextricably woven into the fabric of a person's entire digital existence.
Right. Now take that master key, that persistent identifier, and imagine just handing it over to a room full of complete strangers in a group text. You have absolutely zero control over what the other people in that chat do with your number.
Because they just have it now.
Exactly. They can copy it. They can store it in an insecure plain text spreadsheet on their laptop. They can unknowingly sync their phone's contacts with some sketchy third-party app that scrapes all their data. They can even run your number through public data brokers and find your home address, your relatives, and your property records. The control over who has access to your digital identity evaporates instantly.
To really grasp the scale of how dangerous this exposure is, I feel like we need to talk about the WhatsApp vulnerability case study from the University of Vienna. This is where the concept of the exposed phone number turns into an absolute nightmare.
It really is a nightmare scenario.
These researchers discovered a flaw in WhatsApp's contact discovery feature that exposed the phone numbers of 3.5 billion users. That is nearly half the human population.
It is staggering. And we need to understand the mechanics of how this actually happened, because it illustrates exactly why giving up your number is so perilous. Like most messaging apps, WhatsApp asks to sync with your phone's address book. It wants to cross-reference your contacts with its own database to tell you, hey, your friend John is also on WhatsApp. It's supposed to be a convenience feature.
But the researchers realized there was no rate limit, right? The system wasn't stopping anyone from asking, is this number on WhatsApp, a million times a second?
Correct. So the researchers utilized a tool called LibPhone again.
I thought of it like a telemarketer using a massive robotic auto dialer. Instead of a human punching in numbers, this software just churns out every possible combination of digits across a specific region or country just to see who picks up the phone.
That's exactly how it works. They systematically generated and queried 63 billion potential phone numbers across 245 countries. And because WhatsApp servers didn't throw up a roadblock, the researchers were able to confirm 3.5 billion active accounts. But simply verifying the numbers was just the beginning.
Right, because once they knew a number was attached to a real human, the protocol essentially opened the front door to their profile. Imagine a bot knocking on your specific front door, pulling your profile picture, checking your timestamp to see exactly when you were last awake and online, and logging your status. They scraped the about texts for over 56% of those active accounts.
And for nearly a third of those users, those short about texts contain deeply sensitive, personally identifiable information. People link their other social media profiles, they list their political affiliations, their religious views, their employers.
I have to pause on the cryptography aspect of their findings because this just blew my mind. The researchers also uncovered 2.9 million cases where public encryption keys were being reused, and there was one instance where 20 different U.S. phone numbers were all sharing an encryption key of all zeros.
Yeah, that part is wild.
To a layperson, what does an all zeros encryption key actually mean? It sounds like setting the combination on a massive bank vault to 0000000.
It's exactly like that. It implies a deeply broken security implementation or potentially massive coordinated fraud. Cryptography relies on mathematically complex, entirely unique keys. If 20 accounts share a key of all zeros, the encryption is functionally non-existent. Any data passing through those channels is completely exposed.
Wow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture and tie this massive WhatsApp study back to our group text scenario, the privacy harm isn't something that might happen hypothetically down the road. It happens immediately.
The second you're at it.
The exact second your number is dropped into that unconsented space, your digital identity is compromised. You don't have to send a single message or engage in the chat at all. The mere exposure of your personal access key to unvetted participants is the breach.
So we hand over the keys to our digital lives just by being added, but it's not just our privacy that takes a hit. Our actual structural cybersecurity is totally destabilized. Let's dig into why group texts are fundamentally unsafe environments. Because I think most people assume that an SMS text message is basically a direct private wire between two phones.
That assumption is incredibly dangerous. From an IT security standpoint, SMS text messaging is fundamentally broken. It is a legacy protocol that was never designed for modern security needs.
Yeah, we looked at an advisory memo from Brock University's Information Technology Services Department. They are entirely deprecating SMS. They are actively forcing the university's staff and students to stop using SMS for multi-factor authentication, or MFA. They explicitly state that text messaging is the least secure method of identity verification available today.
And they highlight very specific attack vectors that explain how. SMS is extraordinarily vulnerable to SIM swapping.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, this is where a cybercriminal uses social engineering, basically calling up your mobile carrier like AT&T or Verizon, pretending to be you, and convincing the customer service rep to transfer your phone number to a new SIM card that the criminal physically holds in their hand.
That is terrifying.
It is. The moment that happens, your actual phone goes dead and the hacker receives all your incoming text messages. They trigger password resets on your bank, your email, your crypto wallets, and they intercept the SMS authentication codes to just lock you out of your own life.
Brock also mentioned SS7 attacks. What is SS7 and why does it make texting so fragile?
So SS7 stands for Signaling System 7. It is the underlying global telecommunication protocol that routes calls and text messages between different cellular networks around the world. The protocol was actually designed back in the 1970s.
The 1970s, seriously.
Seriously. Back then, there were only a handful of massive, state-run or heavily regulated telecom monopolies. They all implicitly trusted each other. Today, there are thousands of virtual mobile network operators globally using SS7, but the protocol still operates on that blind 1970s-era trust.
So anyone with access can exploit it.
Exactly. If a rogue operator or a hacker intercepts the handshake between cell towers, they can silently read your text messages or track your physical location without ever touching your actual phone.
So SMS itself is inherently architecturally weak. But how does putting it into a group chat compound the problem?
Because it exponentially expands the attack surface. If you and I are texting one-on-one, the security of our conversation relies solely on my device hygiene and your device hygiene. If we are in a group text with 50 people, the security of that entire conversation now relies on the weakest link among 50 different smartphones, 50 different cellular carriers, and 50 different human beings with varying levels of susceptibility to phishing or malware.
Right. And moving off SMS to an encrypted app doesn't magically solve this, does it? The human element remains the ultimate vulnerability. We have to talk about the signal slip.
Oh yes, the case involving U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
Yep.
It is the perfect illustration of human error, just completely overriding military-grade encryption.
This story is wild. We have top-tier government officials discussing highly sensitive military operations, specifically airstrikes in Yemen. They are using Signal, which is an app universally praised by security professionals for its end-to-end encryption.
Right, it's supposed to be impenetrable.
But someone in that private group chat makes a typo or clicks the wrong name in their contacts and accidentally adds Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine. Suddenly, a civilian journalist is sitting inside a real-time classified military deliberation.
And the crazy thing is, Signal's encryption did exactly what it was supposed to do. It kept outside hackers, internet service providers, and even the government itself from intercepting the data in transit. But cryptography cannot patch human error.
No.
The system fundamentally lacks strict server-level access control or secondary verification for adding new members. The moment an unauthorized participant is misadded by a trusted member, the entire privacy model completely collapses. The encryption is meaningless if the wrong person is holding the phone inside the secure perimeter.
In group communication, one mistake is shared by all.
Exactly. And we really need to sit with how that reframes the whole concept of cybersecurity risk. We are taught that cybersecurity is a personal responsibility, right?
Yeah.
You choose to use a password manager. You choose to enable a VPN on public Wi-Fi. It's your personal risk tolerance.
Right.
But in a non-consensual group text, the risk is imposed upon you by someone else without your consent. You did not choose to share a communication channel with an unvetted participant whose phone might be compromised with spyware. Your personal boundaries are entirely bypassed by the sender's mistake. Trust becomes only as strong as the least secure participant in the room, and you didn't even get a say in who was invited.
Okay, so we've established the data exposure and the massive security vulnerabilities. But we aren't just like emotionless servers processing data. We are human beings with central nervous systems. What is this constant, unrelenting pinging actually doing to our brains? If someone is listening to this and thinking, why don't they just go into the settings and hit mute? We need to explain why that completely fails as a solution.
To understand why the mute button is just a placebo, we have to look at the deep neuroscience of how our brains process notifications. We are dealing with an ancient evolutionary mechanism that has been completely hijacked by Silicon Valley.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Look at the baseline numbers for a modern human. The average smartphone user receives around 96 notifications every single day, and we check our phones roughly 144 times a day.
Which is exhausting just to think about.
Right. That breaks down to checking a screen once every 6 or 7 minutes during our waking hours. Our brains are under constant, unrelenting bombardment.
And the brain does not treat a digital ping as neutral administrative information. It processes it as an urgent evolutionary trigger. The moment your phone buzzes against your leg or the screen lights up on your desk, it immediately activates the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, and the nucleus accumbens in your brain. These are the core engines of your dopaminergic reward system. And this is the terrifying part. This neural activation happens in 100 to 200 milliseconds.
That is literally faster than conscious thought. Before you can even cognitively register, oh, my phone just made a sound, your brain is already flooding your system with dopamine.
Yes. And we need to clarify what dopamine actually does, because pop culture gets it totally wrong. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. It is the anticipation and seeking chemical. It creates an itch that demands to be scratched. It drives you to figure out what the stimulus is. And tech companies have deliberately weaponized this by employing what's called a variable reward schedule.
Which is the exact same psychological mechanism that makes a slot machine in Vegas so addictive, right? You pull the lever, and you don't know if you're getting nothing, a small payout, or the jackpot. With a group text notification, you don't know if that ping is an absolute emergency from your boss, a genuinely sweet message from your spouse, or just the 47th meme from a neighbor you barely know.
Exactly.
That unpredictability maximizes the dopamine release. It makes checking the notification neurologically irresistible.
It really does. It's a compulsion.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah.
If I am added to a massive group chat and it is buzzing every 5 seconds, and I recognize it's just nonsense, why can't I just swipe left, hit the little crossed out bell icon, and mute the thread? It stops making noise. Why isn't that the end of the psychological strain?
Because of a very powerful psychological principle called the Zeigarnik effect.
I love the history behind this. It goes back to the 1920s in Vienna, right? A psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik was sitting in a bustling cafe just watching the waiters work. She noticed they could remember these incredibly complex, multi-item orders perfectly without writing them down, as long as the bill remained unpaid.
Right.
But the exact second the customer paid and the transaction was finalized, the waiter's memory of the order was completely wiped.
It's a brilliant observation. The Zeigarnik effect dictates that the human brain is hardwired to prioritize and remember incomplete, unresolved, or interrupted tasks far better than completed ones. An active threat or an unfinished job basically takes precedence in our working memory.
So how does that apply to the phone?
Well, when you look at your phone and see a little red badge that says 83 over your messaging app, your brain flags it. Even if the device didn't make a sound, even if the vibration is off, your brain registers those 83 unread messages as 83 incomplete tasks. You have an unresolved social interaction hanging over your head.
It creates what the neuroscience literature calls a cognitive open loop.
Precisely. And your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex planning, executive function, and working memory, has to actively expend metabolic resources to ignore that open loop. You are continuously dedicating brain power to not looking at the chat.
Wow, so you're draining energy just by ignoring it.
Exactly. So muting just hides the audio cue. It does not close the loop. Because you are unable to actually exit the digital room, your brain knows you are still in there, and the cognitive strain is ongoing and exhausting.
And we see the real-world fallout of that exhaustion in the clinical data. The sources for Medical News Today and introspective counseling dive deep into the symptoms of this specific kind of digital fatigue. They talk about social burnout and texting anxiety. The introspective counseling piece specifically highlights the sheer dread of opening your phone and seeing a mountain of unread messages.
It's a very real phenomenon.
Particularly for high-achieving individuals or people who struggle with people-pleasing tendencies, there is this immense, crushing pressure to always be available, to always show up and respond, and that just fuels chronic, low-level anxiety.
It's incredibly draining. And there is a profound biological reason why managing a chaotic text thread feels so much more exhausting than having a conversation with 50 people at a physical party. Human communication evolved to rely on complex, subtle physical cues: tone of voice, facial microexpressions, posture, hand gestures. These cues allow our brains to easily process intent. They facilitate something called interbrain synchrony.
Interbrain synchrony is essentially that click you feel when you and a friend are on the exact same wavelength during a coffee date. Your brains are literally syncing up their neural oscillation.
Exactly. Texting strips all of that rich contextual data away. You have zero interbrain synchrony. You're left staring at plain text and perhaps a vague emoji, and your brain has to work twice as hard, burning extra cognitive fuel to guess the sender's tone and intent.
That makes so much sense.
When you multiply that cognitive load by 50 people in a rapid-fire group chat, it's no wonder people experience physical symptoms.
The anxiety manifests physically. People report extreme irritability, muscle tension in their neck and shoulders, rapid shallow breathing, and severe sleep disruption because they check their phones in the middle of the night. People often gaslight themselves into thinking they're just being overly sensitive to a minor annoyance. But the reality is, forced availability is a form of psychological intrusion.
I think that is the most validating takeaway from the entire neurological segment of our research. If you feel distressed, overwhelmed, or physically tense because your phone won't stop buzzing from a chat you didn't ask to join, it is not a character flaw. You are not being dramatic.
That's a huge relief to hear.
It is a highly predictable, biologically appropriate neurological response to having your attentional autonomy repeatedly violated. You are experiencing a sustained, low-grade fight-or-flight stress response because your brain perceives an endless stream of unresolvable demands.
Once you realize that your nervous system is literally trapped in this stress loop, you have to take a step back and ask, who put it there? Who holds the power in this dynamic? We have to look at the structural power, control, and coercion inherent in this technology. Who actually controls the interaction in a non-consensual group text?
Well, we break down the basic architecture of the medium. The power rests almost entirely with the initiator. Think about the mechanics. Who gets to decide who is added? The initiator.
Right.
Who controls the removal of members? Usually, no one has the administrative power to boot someone, which means the heavy burden of trying to awkwardly disengage falls entirely on the captive recipient. Who sets the topic of conversation? Who establishes the tone and the frequency of the messages? The initiator and a few active participants dictate all of it, while the unwilling members are just dragged along in their wake.
The source material on cyberstalking from Wikipedia really brings this power imbalance into stark, frankly, terrifying relief. It discusses how online groups can rapidly degenerate and form mobs. And the psychology of the mob is that group dynamics inherently dehumanize whoever is outside the coal clique or whoever tries to resist.
Yes, the mob mentality is very real online.
The group members feel validated and reinforced by one another. They lose their sense of individual personal responsibility because the mindset becomes, well, everyone else is sending memes, so I will too. It becomes a self-justifying echo chamber where basic social etiquette just goes out the window.
And when you map that aggressive mob dynamic onto a digital space where the victim cannot physically walk away or technologically hit an exit button, the potential for coercion, bullying, and harassment skyrockets. The group feels emboldened by their numbers and the lack of consequences, while the individual recipient feels entirely isolated, overwhelmed, and trapped.
We also have to acknowledge that this forced visibility and lack of control does not impact everyone equally across society. I want to be very clear with you, the listener, right now. We are not taking a political stance here. We are simply imparting the empirical findings of privacy researchers and sociologists regarding how digital surveillance and data exposure impact different communities.
That context is absolutely vital. If we look at the research paper titled Dismantling the Black Opticon and the Archive study analyzing digital safety for Black communities, they detail how mandatory data collection, unconsented surveillance, and forced digital visibility disproportionately harm marginalized or high-risk groups.
For example, the studies point out that protest organizers, such as those involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, face significantly heightened real-world risks from data exposure. We are talking about life-threatening tactics like swatting.
Which is just horrifying.
For those who don't know, swatting is when a malicious actor falsely reports a violent crime, like a hostage situation at your address, prompting a heavily armed police tactical team to kick your door down. If your phone number is inherently linked to your physical home address through public data brokers, and that number is exposed in a massive, potentially hostile group chat, your risk of being targeted is exponentially magnified.
Furthermore, these studies highlight deep systemic economic inequities. The researchers note that lower-income individuals often do not have the financial resources to simply buy their way out of the problem. They can't necessarily afford premium, subscription-based, distraction-free software.
Or a second phone, right?
Exactly. They can't afford a second smartphone to maintain a strict firewall between their personal life and work life. They might lack access to advanced, paid privacy-protecting tools. Therefore, they bear the brunt of this forced inclusion because they have fewer structural, financial ways to defend their boundaries.
The takeaway from these sociological sources is profound and undeniable. When one party controls entry and exit, participation is no longer equal.
It ceases to be a conversation and becomes an imposition. It is inherently coercive. The architecture of the group text fundamentally favors the person who initiated it and punishes the captive audience who cannot escape it. The power imbalance isn't just a byproduct. It is baked into the code of the technology itself.
Now, how is that severe power imbalance exacerbated when the content of the chat shifts from everyday annoyances like logistics or bad jokes to something deeply personal or deeply ideological? What happens when religious messaging crosses into a boundary violation? Why does belief-based content escalate the harm in these unconsented spaces?
It escalates the harm significantly because religious and ideological beliefs are among the most intimate, deeply personal aspects of human identity. When someone suddenly injects explicit religious messaging into a professional networking thread or a mixed neighborhood group chat that was created without consent, it forces a completely unwarranted ideological exposure onto the recipients.
Right. If I am added to a neighborhood watch thread solely to keep an eye out for stolen packages, and suddenly a neighbor starts sending daily religious devotionals or intense political manifestos, the established context of that digital space has been totally violated. But let me challenge that for a moment. What if the sender genuinely means well? What if they deeply believe they're sharing something positive, uplifting, and helpful to the community?
This is a crucial distinction to make. The issue we are analyzing here is absolutely not about criticizing any specific religion, nor is it about judging the sender's internal moral intent. The harm does not stem from the theology. It stems from the structural imposition of a belief system within a captive channel.
Because you can't leave.
Because the recipient cannot easily hit an exit button and physically leave the group, they are forced into an unwanted, unconsented association with that ideology.
And the silence of the recipient becomes a trap. If you are stuck in this massive group chat and you choose not to respond to the religious messages because you are trying to be professional, polite, or just avoid a massive digital argument, your silence can very easily be misread by the sender and by everyone else observing the chat as quiet acceptance or even endorsement of the content.
Exactly. You are assumed to be part of the congregation just because you are in the room. Or, conversely, consider what happens if you do speak up. If you assert a boundary and say, please leave me off these religious updates, you immediately risk becoming the target of the group's ire. You disrupt that mob dynamic we discussed earlier.
Right, you become the outcast.
You become the outcast. The high exit barriers of the technology amplify the violation. You are trapped in a digital room where you are forced to consume ideology against your will with no safe way to object.
It is a profound violation of personal boundaries. Belief without consent becomes intrusion, regardless of intent.
That framing is essential for understanding digital ethics. Freedom of expression is a fundamental right, but it does not include the right to force a captive, trapped audience to listen to you, especially in a digital space that the audience never voluntarily chose to enter.
So what does this all mean? Bringing all these threads together, you are trapped in this space. Your data is exposed, your brain is exhausted, and the content is crossing your boundaries. You finally muster the emotional energy to draw a hard line. You type out the message, please stop texting me, or please remove my number from this group. What happens if the sender simply ignores your request and keeps texting?
That is where everything changes.
That is where we cross a massive line, moving from psychology and social ethics directly into the realm of criminal law. Let's look at the legal thresholds of harassment.
The legal threshold here is surprisingly stark, and it's a huge wake-up call for how we view digital communication. When we examine the legal analysis from the law firm Eisner-Gorin LLP regarding California Penal Code Section 653.2, or the federal stalking statute found in 18 U.S. Code Section 2261A, a fundamental legal shift occurs the exact moment a recipient asks for the communication to stop.
The request to stop establishes a hard, legally recognizable boundary.
Yes. Prior to that specific request, a sender might legally argue that they thought the messages were welcome, or at least mutually tolerated. It's a gray area. But once you say, clearly, stop texting me, all ambiguity evaporates. If the sender ignores that explicit request and continues to send messages, they are actively establishing a pattern of conduct.
And that's illegal.
In the eyes of the law, a pattern of unwanted electronic communication that serves no legitimate purpose and causes a person reasonable distress is the textbook legal definition of harassment.
And the history of telecommunications law really supports this interpretation. We reviewed a fascinating law review article from the St. Thomas Law Review discussing the Communications Decency Act and behavior in cyberspace. It points out that historically, the U.S. Supreme Court has always protected unwilling victims from the unilateral imposition of unwelcome content. The classic historical paradigm they use is the obscene phone call.
Exactly. Decades ago, the Supreme Court recognized that an individual has a fundamental right to be left alone in the privacy of their own home. You should not be forced to endure harassing, relentless phone calls. The law protected that boundary. But the modern group text presents a very unique, highly problematic evolution of this harm.
Because of the exit button issue.
Right. With a traditional phone call, you have the ultimate power. You can just hang up the receiver. The interaction ends. But because a group text, as we discussed, often lacks a functional systemic exit button, the harm is ongoing and persistent. You can't just hang up. The unilateral imposition of content never stops.
And lawmakers have actually updated the statutes to reflect this inescapable digital reality. For instance, the California law we mentioned, Penal Code 653.2, doesn't just punish people for sending direct threats of violence, it explicitly criminalizes indirect conduct.
That is a vital distinction for the modern internet era. Indirect conduct means you do not even have to be the person sending the threatening messages yourself to be held criminally liable.
Wait, really? How does that work?
If you electronically distribute someone's personal identifying information, like dropping their private cell phone number into a public forum or a massive chat without their consent, and you do it with the intent to provoke or incite third parties to harass them, you are committing a crime. So intentionally adding someone to a massive hostile group chat where you know they will be bombarded and targeted by others can absolutely trigger criminal liability.
Wow. And the penalties for crossing these lines are severe. They are not a joke. Under federal law, using a telecommunications device to repeatedly harass or intimidate someone can carry a sentence of up to 2 years in federal prison.
Yeah, the consequences are very real.
And if we look back at the TCPA rules governing commercial senders, the civil financial penalties are staggering. The FCC can levy fines of $500 to $1,500 per individual text message. If a business traps you in a promotional group text and sends you 20 messages after you explicitly replied S.P., they are potentially looking at a $30,000 fine for a single recipient. The law clearly recognizes the severity of the intrusion.
It does. And I think we really need to dispel a very common, dangerous myth about what constitutes harassment. People often assume that a message has to contain extreme profanity or a direct, actionable threat of physical violence to be considered legally harassing.
Yeah.
That is entirely false.
Okay, wait. So if someone says, "Have a blessed day," over and over again, you're telling me that can be legally classified as harassment? That feels like a massive leap in how we view intent.
It sounds like a leap until you look at the mechanics of consent we've been discussing this whole time. Think of it this way. Harassment is defined by persistence after refusal, not tone.
Let me repeat that, because that is the crux of the entire legal argument. Harassment is defined by persistence after refusal, not tone.
Precisely. If you have clearly and unequivocally told someone to stop contacting you, and they text you saying, "Just checking in, hope you have a great weekend," that is a boundary violation. It is a legally actionable continuation of unwanted contact. The tone of the words might be perfectly friendly, polite, or even loving, but the physical act of overriding your explicit refusal is inherently coercive and harassing. The crime is in the persistence, not the vocabulary.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of everything we've unpacked today. We have looked at the neurochemical loops hijacking your brain's dopamine system. We've explored the immediate privacy disaster of having your persistent identifier exposed to strangers. We've broken down the incredibly fragile cybersecurity of 1970s SMS protocols, and we've walked through the strict legal thresholds of cyberstalking and boundary violations.
We really have covered all the bases.
And it all leads to this undeniable conclusion. Once consent is withdrawn, responsibility shifts entirely to those who continue the communication. At that point, harm is no longer incidental, it is maintained.
That is the core structural accountability we need to recognize moving forward in the digital age. This entire conversation is not about mediating petty interpersonal disputes or judging someone's tone of voice or policing how families talk to each other.
Right.
It is about deeply understanding the architecture of the communication tools we use every single day. Whether it is the Zeigarnik effect holding your prefrontal cortex hostage with cognitive open loops, or the immediate privacy breach of your phone number being logged in a stranger's insecure device, or the severe legal liability of ignoring a clear opt-out request, the burden, both ethically and legally, falls squarely on the sender, who initiates and maintains the unconsented space.
The next time you pull up your phone to start a new group text, look closely at the list of names you are about to add. Ask yourself, are you inviting them to a conversation, or are you locking them in a room they don't have a key to? And more importantly, how many rooms are you currently locked in?
That's a great question to leave off on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take a hard look at your own digital boundaries this week, and we'll see you next time.
This podcast uses AI-generated voice elements and synthetic co-hosts utilized to enhance clarity, continuity, and production. All insights, structure, and direction are intentionally designed and created by Python Patchez, the AnalyTick architect. That concludes today's episode. Remember, stay aware of your digital footprint, protect your personal info, and continue building your technology knowledge. Neural Notes returns next Tech Tuesday with more insights, strategies, and empowerment.